In the year 1500, Europe was an unlikely candidate to dominate the world. At that time, the Ottoman Empire had just captured Constantinople, the great city of Eastern Christianity, and China, with its massive population, wealth, and technological prowess, regarded itself as the center of civilization. Europe, in contrast, was politically fragmented, economically weaker, and culturally divided. Yet, by 1900, Europe had achieved something that would have seemed unthinkable. It controlled nearly the entire globe. How did this happen? In this documentary, we will explore the story of how Europe rose from a position of relative obscurity to become the dominant global power over the span of 4 centuries. To guide us through this historical journey, we'll turn to The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, a masterful book written by British historian Paul Kennedy. Kennedy's work offers critical insights into how Europe emerged as the most powerful force in the world. The story is not just one of military conquest, but of scientific discovery, technological innovation, entrepreneurial spirit, and the constant competition that shaped Europe's trajectory. Kennedy also shows us how Europe's dominance, built over centuries, began to falter by the 20th century, signaling the end of an era. In this journey, we'll unpack the factors that led to Europe's rise, the mistakes that caused the eventual decline of its empires, and the lessons history offers us today. The decline of the great non-Western powers. To understand Europe's rise, we must first look at the fall of the great non-Western powers. In the 16th century, powerful civilizations such as the Ottoman Empire and the Ming Dynasty in China began to weaken. The Ottoman Empire's stagnation. At the dawn of the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire was at its peak. It controlled much of the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Europe. Its military power was feared, and its cultural achievements were admired. However, over time, internal stagnation began to take its toll on the empire. The Ottoman leadership made several critical mistakes. One of the most significant was their resistance to adopting new ideas. In 1515, the Ottoman authorities banned the printing press, a symbol of their growing fear of change. While Europe was revolutionizing the spread of knowledge, the Ottomans turned inward, stifling intellectual and cultural growth. At the same time, the merchant elite was plundering the empire's wealth. Instead of investing in the empire's future, they were hoarding resources for themselves. By 1571, the Ottoman fleet suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Lepanto, where European forces, with their superior naval technology, destroyed much of the Ottoman navy. It was a symbolic moment that marked the beginning of the Ottoman decline. China's isolationism. Meanwhile, in China, the Ming Dynasty had turned inward as well. China, once the world's greatest innovator, had produced game-changing inventions like gunpowder, the compass, and paper. However, by the 16th century, the imperial bureaucracy stifled innovation, and the once great Chinese merchant class faced severe restrictions. In 1433, the Ming Emperor ordered the cessation of maritime exploration, recalling the great Chinese treasure fleets that had sailed as far as Africa. The decision to close China off from the world may have been the most consequential in the country's history, as it led to centuries of stagnation. As Europe expanded across the globe, China became increasingly isolated, missing out on the opportunities that the age of exploration brought. While these once powerful empires faltered, Europe began to experience an economic and scientific boom, setting the stage for its dominance. 4 key factors behind Europe's rise. According to Paul Kennedy, 4 major factors explain Europe's rise to global power. 1. Political fragmentation and competition. Europe was politically fragmented, divided into numerous small kingdoms and principalities. This fragmentation was not a weakness, it was, in fact, a strength. Unlike China, where a single imperial authority ruled, Europe's geography, characterized by mountains, rivers, and peninsulas, encouraged the development of multiple competing states. Each of these states was driven by competition. They were in constant rivalry, vying for supremacy in trade, military power, and culture. This competition sparked innovation. To outdo their rivals, European nations sought to improve their military technologies, perfect their navigational techniques, and develop more efficient economic systems. As Kennedy points out, this competition pushed European rulers to sponsor explorers like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, whose voyages opened up vast new territories for European expansion. 2. Military and technological superiority. Europe's military superiority was a crucial factor in its rise. The small kingdoms of Europe developed advanced weaponry and naval technologies that allowed them to project power across the globe. Portugal, for instance, was a relatively small country, yet it was able to establish an empire that spanned Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Because its ships were more advanced than those of its rivals, and its sailors were better trained. Portugal's ability to control key sea routes allowed it to dominate the lucrative spice trade, making it one of the wealthiest nations in Europe. Kennedy emphasizes that European empires didn't just expand through brute force. Their military superiority was based on innovation. Europe's leaders invested heavily in scientific research, leading to the development of advanced artillery, fortified ships, and new methods of warfare. These innovations gave European armies a decisive advantage over their rivals. 3. Europe's entrepreneurial spirit. Another factor that set Europe apart from other civilizations was its entrepreneurial spirit. While the Ottoman and Chinese empires stifled individual initiative, Europe celebrated it. Merchants, inventors, and explorers were encouraged to take risks and pursue their ambitions. This culture of entrepreneurship allowed Europe to develop a dynamic economy that was constantly growing and evolving. European entrepreneurs weren't just successful because they were lucky. They had the backing of governments that recognized the importance of trade and commerce. European nations established trade routes that spanned the globe, bringing in vast amounts of wealth that funded further expansion. As Paul Kennedy explains, Europe's leaders understood that in order to dominate the world, they needed to encourage economic growth and technological innovation. They created an environment in which risk-taking was rewarded, and this, in turn, fueled Europe's rise. 4. Economic and intellectual freedom. Finally, Kennedy highlights the importance of Europe's culture of economic and intellectual freedom. Unlike in China or the Ottoman Empire, where ideas were tightly controlled, Europe allowed for the free exchange of ideas. Merchants, thinkers, and inventors who faced persecution in one European kingdom could find refuge in another. This created a marketplace of ideas, where innovations could spread quickly across the continent. The result was a rapid advancement in science, economics, and industry. The Renaissance, the Scientific Revolution, and the Enlightenment were all products of this culture of intellectual freedom. Europe became a hub of innovation, attracting some of the brightest minds from around the world. The European miracle. Kennedy refers to Europe's rise as a miracle because it was so unexpected. How could a continent that had once been divided and relatively poor come to dominate the world? The answer lies in the combination of economic laissez-faire policies, political competition, military innovation, and intellectual liberty. Together, these factors created a perfect storm that allowed Europe to expand its influence across the globe. By the 19th century, European powers had established colonies in every corner of the world. They controlled trade routes, built vast empires, and accumulated enormous wealth. But Europe's dominance didn't come without costs. The expansion of European empires led to the exploitation of indigenous peoples, the destruction of local cultures, and the rise of imperialism. The decline of European power. While Europe reached the height of its power in the 19th century, its dominance was not meant to last. As Kennedy explains, the very factors that led to Europe's rise also contributed to its decline. World wars and the end of European dominance. The competition between European nations that had once fueled innovation and expansion eventually led to destructive conflicts. The First and Second World Wars drained Europe of its resources, both human and economic. By the end of World War II, Europe's empires were crumbling. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the new global superpowers, and Europe's role in world affairs began to diminish. The rise of nationalism. At the same time, the rise of nationalism in Europe's colonies led to the decline of imperial power. Countries in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East began to demand independence, and one by one, the European empires fell. Kennedy notes that while Europe's dominance lasted for several centuries, it was ultimately undone by the same forces that had brought it to power: competition, innovation, and the desire for freedom. Lessons from history. Paul Kennedy's The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers is not just a history of Europe's rise to dominance. It is a study of the factors that create and destroy empires. As we look to the future, Kennedy's work offers valuable lessons. No empire, no matter how powerful, can last forever. Europe's rise was fueled by competition, innovation, and freedom, but its decline was caused by overextension, conflict, and the loss of economic and military superiority. In the end, the rise and fall of great powers remind us that history is cyclical. The forces that bring nations to power can just as easily bring them down. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth historical analysis. Let's explore the stories that shaped our world together.